Hey there. I was in a conversation really recently with a group of people talking. They were talking online about whether or not you could do gross and volume. Can you do gross and volume? Now, to answer that question, that's what I'm going to attempt to do here. To answer that question, you first have to decide how you define gross and how you define volume. In other words, when people say that, they're talking about, I think in their heads, they're sort of saying, can you do $4,000 a copy and 500 used cars a month? Now, that's kind of an extreme number, both of those. There's people probably do it, but not very many, right? So, but you have to define for you what you mean by can you do gross. So how much gross is a good gross for you? Where are you now? I mean, if you're doing $800 a copy right now, that really sucks, right? So we have again, you have to define that, and then you have to define volume in the same way. What do you mean by volume? Are you currently doing 50, 60, 75 units a month? And would volume for you be 100 or 150? So I think before you can even come close to kind of answering that question, you have to kind of come up with a definition of what you mean for you. Now, back during the pandemic, we got spoiled because we did pretty good volume because we sold probably everything that we had. We made really crazy grosses on them. But so you can't compare it to that. But you do have to remember that the law of supply and demand is always in play. In other words, that has an impact on your ability to do volume or to do gross. If you have a whole lot of something, you're not going to make much money on it. So if you've got a bunch of aged used cars out there and you got a lot of inventory, it's going to be really hard to make money. So, before you can even improve your gross, I'm babbling a little bit, I apologize, but before you can improve your gross, you've got to improve your inventory in terms of how much stuff you have out there that's already over 30 days old. So that's gonna impact growth. So when you ask it the question, can you do gross or volume? There's other questions, other things you have to fix before you can even think about that. I mean, that should make some sense to you. Can you maximize both? Yeah, you can find there's a happy middle ground there somewhere, but you have to kind of figure out what it is. Don't think that you can ignore reality when trying to out process the market. In other words, you may have great processes, but you can't ignore the fact that the law of supply and demand is always going to be there. You're not smarter than the law of supply and demand. Let me say it to you again. You are not smarter than the law of supply and demand. So no matter what you do, that's going to have an impact on what we're talking about here. If you can't get used cars, if you don't have a good buying center, if you're not aggressively out buying cars from the public, then you're not going to have the supply of cars you need to do the volume you would like to do. There's so many factors involved. Maybe where you're located plays a role in it, but you're not going to outsmart the law of supply and demand. Hey, I'm Tommy Gibbs. If I can help you, please reach out. Thanks and have a great day. See you. Bye.